Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Yevamot daf Lamed Aleph. We're going to begin on Lamed Aleph, 6 lines from the top with the word Esvei. So the Gemara began by understanding why in our Mishnah it mentions by Kedushin or Safek Kedushin that he throws the Kedushi Kesef and it's Safek Karv Lo, Safek Karv La. However, when it comes to the case of Gittin, it doesn't mention that Safek. Instead, it brings different Svekos in our Mishnah, such as Kasab Ksav Yado, without witnesses. There are witnesses, but Zman was not written on the get, or there was the Zman. However, there was only one aid. The question is, why doesn't it stay consistent? So he said, when it comes to the case of Safek Gerushin, in which Rashi says over there on the Mishnah that you don't even need to do Chalitza for the Tzoras Ereva, because she's definitely able to go, and you would not do Yibum or even Chalitza with her. So the reason is because if we allowed Chalitza, then you may end up doing Yibum. So, and that's certainly an issue. So why would that be the case? So we mentioned in yesterday's daf, just to recap, by the case of Safek Gerushin, by throwing the get, so before that Safek took place, she was your wife. There's no question she's married to you. The whole question is, was she removed from you? And therefore, since the other woman is the Tsaras Ereva, so that is a significant suffix. That's a real problem, because based on the suffix, before that, she has a chazaka of being married to you. And since there's a chazaka of being married to you, so it's possible that it was not a get, and therefore you can't do Yibum with a Tsaras Ereva. And therefore that's the problem why we wouldn't in that situation even want you to do Chalitza, because possibly you may end up doing Yibum. Mashen came the other way around when it comes to Kedushin or Safek Kedushin. So before you did this Kedushin, she was not married to you. She was a Penuya. She was unmarried. So therefore the other wife, there's no Tsaras Ereva. So therefore, if in fact it was not a Kedushin, so even if, let's say, you did Chalitza, that's not a problem, because if, let's say, people say, oh, you did Chalitza, so maybe you'll do Yibum, but there's already a Chazaka, as it says, a Chazaka Kakaima. There's already a Chazaka that this other woman was not your wife. And therefore, maybe it was not a good Kedushin, and that's the reason why we can do Chalitza, and Liyatsur, you end up doing Yibum, it's not the end of the world, because she's probably not Tsaras Ereva anyway, based on the Chazaka. However, in the case of our Mishnah, when it came to the case of Safek Gerushin, Me'ikra din Midaraisa, those cases were actually good Gittin. We say that they're not good Gittin, we don't hold them as good Gittin, but Midaraisa they are good. And since they're good Gittin, but they're not accepted as good Gittin, that's the reason why Yibum cannot be done, but it will still require Chalitza. So Esvei Abaya Nafal Bias Olav. Let's say a house falls down tragically on a person, V'el Bas Ochiv, and also it fell on your brother's daughter. Ve'en Yodea Ezmehem Meis Rishon. So in this situation, we don't know who actually died first. So in that situation, because of this issue of Mapoles, and there's this doubt of if your husband died first, or you're Zakuk to Yibum, if the other guy died first and you weren't, so rather this girl, in which she was the Tsaras Ereva to, or the Ereva, right? So you're the Tsaras Ereva. So if she died first, so then she died, and therefore you're not Tsaras Ereva. So ve'en yodeh ez mehem meis rishon. So what does the Tsarasa do in this situation? No one knows what happened, who died first. So therefore, Tsarasa chaletzes lo mesyavemas. So you say, in this case, the Tsara has to at least do chalitza, not Yibum. We're not going to do Yibum because it's possible that maybe the man died first, and therefore she's Tsaras Ereva, which is Asur, is not you're not allowed to do Yibum with. But we're still going to require to do Chalitza, because what happens if it was the opposite? What if the woman died first, and therefore she was not at Tsaras Ereva when afterwards, even a few seconds later, the man died. So then technically, there's a strong zika to marry the brother through Yibum. We're not going to do Yibum, but at least we'll do Chalitza. In fact, the Gemara, Amai Hachanami Neima, Isha Zubacheskas Heter Lashuko Medes. This woman is Becheskas Heter Lashuk, that she has the chazaka of potentially going out. But the reason why is because we should assume because she is married and she has a co-wife who's an erva, so therefore when her husband dies, it's understood that everyone knows she's Saras Erva, so there's no din yibum. So why would we require anything, right? Why would we require her to do chalitza in this situation? She has a chazaka. So we're just being machmer. You're right. Technically, she has a chazaka of being tsaras erev, and therefore she should be completely mutter to go. However, l'chom are going to require chalitza. What do you mean? That's a chomer de'asalei kulahu. Shimata oimer chaletas misyavemes. We said before that this is a legitimate concern. That if we allow chalitza, which is what we're saying in this case, then maybe yibum will be done, and that's a huge problem because since yibum if yibum would be done in this case, it would be terrible because what happened if, let's say, the man died first, which means that she's mamish, really it's Saras Ereva, and that's a problem. He wouldn't have been allowed to do yibum. But if we allow chalitza, you may end up doing yibum, as we said before, by the case above. So gerushin deshchichi gazer b'rabanan. So the Gemara gives one answer. When it comes to divorce, unfortunately, that's a common thing, and therefore we have to be geyser this possibility, even in case of safek gerushin. Mapoyles deshchicha gazer b'rabanan. Rabbanan are not going to make a gezerah in this unusual circumstance. Inami gerushin, and therefore we're not concerned. In other words, we're not going to be geyser and say, oh, you know what, we better not do chalitza, because otherwise, if you say chaletzes, then misyavemes. So we should say don't even do chalitza. No, it's such an uncommon occurrence. It's not something to really worry about. Says Rashi, Gazer b'Rabbanan the safek gerushin be'erev lo tachleitz hatzara shimata omer chaletzes misyavemes. So it's interesting. The gezerah is actually for her not to do anything. So that's only in the case of Gittin. That is where we said that, because that's something which is common. Inami, a second answer. Gerushin dekaima erva deka moichach the sarasa kematzrach slachalitza. So what happened in this situation? So by gerushin, where again, right now she is a tsaras erva. The question is, did she get divorced? Did the other one get divorced? It was a safek. So, and therefore we say by the throwing of the get, we say you don't even need to do chalitza. So it's something which could be cleared out. The tzarasa kamatzur chalitza. Amri kamu b'Rabbanan begita to get the malihu. The Rabbanan say that really it is a get. V'yasa li'avumi l'tzara. And it's possible what happened was the Beis Din calculated this. So what's the whole issue? The whole issue is if they do chalitza, they may end up doing yibum. So the question is, let's say yibum actually ends up being done. So we said, okay, it's not a problem. But because maybe what happened is it looks like the Beis Din is the one who's involved over here. So the Beis Din may have declared and figured out that it really was a valid get, and therefore this woman is not an erva, is not Saras Ereva, because maybe it was a good get, and therefore her wife, her co-wife rather, is gone out of the picture. So in there, a person can say, oh, that's why we allowed chalitza, right? However, or even yibum, mapoilus, so therefore because of that, that's where the concern is, and therefore we're not going to even allow chalitza, because otherwise, if we do chalitza, we're like, oh yeah, maybe the Beis Din is saying chalitza because they probably realized it was really not, it was really a good get, and therefore they'll end up doing yibum. Mapoilus mikamu behu rabbanan b'mapoilus. No one's going to say that when it comes to this house, there's no added knowledge or information that the base can possibly find out. So that everyone knows that the base then knows no more information about who died first. So chalitza, therefore, why? But they're doing chalitza, but they'll say, it's only being done b'safek. So therefore, no one would end up doing yibum because of this, because no one would say, it must be because the base then figured out what the correct answer was. No, because there's no way for them to figure out the right answer. So it must be the reason why chalitza was done was just out to suffix. No one's going to end up doing yibum because of this. Mashen came by Gershon. It's possible to say, hey, why are they doing chalitza over here? Maybe it wasn't a suffix. Maybe the basin afterwards was able to figure out that really it was closer to her, and therefore it's really a get. Therefore she's not the other woman's not at Sar Serva, and therefore let's do yibum because we're seeing that they're allowing chalitza. Let's do yibum. Okay. The Gabi Gershon Milo Tanan. When it comes to Gershon, do we not learn this? The woman is standing in Rosh Hashanah. The Zarkula, and he throws her the get. Karavla, close to her, Migrashas. Karavlo and Migrashas. So that's what we said. If it's close to him, it wasn't a get. Mechsal Migrashas and Migrashas. However, it says if it's somewhere in between, we just can't figure it out, so it's a suffix. So, why do we need to know whether or not it's a suffix? What does that matter? She's married, but is she considered divorced? The Kohen who asurla. It's saying that if he was a Kohen, then she is usur to him. Now, why is that? Because a Kohen is not allowed to marry a Gerusha. So let's say the possibility that he actually gave her the get, and then he decides to remarry her. He's not allowed to. If it's not a get, then it's not a problem. Obviously, he can remain married to her. Also, when it comes to any Kohen in general, afterwards, if it's a suffix. Okay, but this is talking about where the husband is a suffix. This get. Of course, a Kohen can never marry Gerusha. That's Chavi Lavin. V'i ervahi for the Gemara. If let's say we're talking about she's an erva, sarasa boy chalitza. Another pshat is that the tsar is going to need chalitza, which is exactly not what we said before. Clearly here we do require chalitza. We said in our Mishnah and Rashi that you don't need chalitza in this case. It's not true. We see beferish you need to have chalitza in this situation. And why do we do chalitza? It's a chumrah. So it's just chumrah. It's chumrah dasli kula because you may end up doing yibum. We don't have that concern. We clearly see we don't have that concern. So ha'it morlam Rabbi Rav Yosef Tavayu hacha b'shtei kiti edem askinan. This is a unique situation. Here we're talking about two pairs of witnesses. What exactly happened? Achas omeres karv lo. The achas omeres karv lo. The suffix isn't just stam where it was thrown. There's two witnesses that say she's divorced because it was closer to her. You have two witnesses that say no. She's not divorced because it was close to him. That's the suffix. Dabli sveika deraisa. That's considered a different suffix than what we're talking about. It's not that he just threw it, we just don't know. In that situation, maybe we don't allow chalitza. But over here, it's a suffix deraisa. Says Rashi, even the tray, you do have two witnesses that Amri Karav law. Their mom is saying that she's divorced, 100%. Lo matzi lo ukmi tsara achazaka. No longer does the Sarah have any chazaka. We can't just let her go without chalitza, because maybe she really is no longer tsaras erva, and therefore we at least require chalitza in this case. However, our Mishnah is talking about there's just one group of witnesses, and one witness, says Rashi, Eid Omer Karvlo, the Eid Omer Karvla. Each witness is saying different testimony. Hilchach, therefore, says Rashi, by Kedushin, so maybe she was never married. Hu de'ika lemisne mishum decheskas heter layavim. We say that the Sarah has a chazaka of heter to do yibum. That is the truth, because one witness that says karv la, lo mafkina la b'chazaka. That one witness cannot remove that chazaka. V'cholza. Avol begerishin. So therefore, again, you have one witness. That's not enough. So therefore, we don't assume necessarily that this woman was really married. So therefore, it's not a tsaras erva. So therefore, that's the reason why she can do chalitza. Avol begerishin. When it comes to Safik Gerushin, Leikel Misne the Becheskes Heter L'Shuk Kaima, we can't say that she can go on the street. The Aid Echad the Oimer Karv La, one witness that says yes, she's divorced. Boy Lafuki Mechazaka, we can't say that that one guy is going to remove her from her chazaka. Kivandalik Eidus Shalem, says Rashi, since we don't have full testimony, Azin Lakua, we're going to go lenient. The Komakmina and Chazaka, and we're going to assume that they were actually both still married, and therefore she is Saras Erva. Vul boy Chalitza, and therefore not going to allow Chalitza. Shimata Eimer Chalitzas Misyavemes. Because if we allow Chalitza, you may end up doing Yibum. Okay, so that's the explanation. Okay, B'shtei Kiti Eda Maskina and Achzam Res Karvla, Vachzam Res Karvla, Davli Sveka de Raisa, Masnisa de Hacha Bekat Achas, Davli Sveka de Rabbanon. Remind of a Masnisa de Hacha Bekat Achas. How do we know that's what the case of our Mishnah is? Yomi de Kedushin, Ma Kedushin Bekat Achas, Avgerishin Bekat Achas. Just like when it came to Kedushin, it's one group. So too when it comes to getting same thing. But Kedushin Gufayu Mamai de Bekat Achas. How do we know by the Kedushin that's one pair of witnesses? Dilma Beis Kiti Edim. Maybe it's two pairs. So it says no. Iba Beis Kiti Edim. If by the case of two, if it was actually two Kiti Edim by Kedushin, then what would you say? Tisyavim v'ein bekach klum. We would say that do yibum v'ein bekach klum, and there's nothing wrong with it. So if in fact there was two witnesses, so in that situation, says Rashi. So let's go weiter. So kaime edim. So in emekaklum kaime edim v'karmi karvla. So she may be at Saras Ereva, right? Because you have two witnesses that are saying that actually it was a good kedushin. Yad omeres tisyab emekaklum. It's very hard to understand. What does that mean? If you have two witnesses that say yes, she is actually married, because I saw that the kedushin was thrown closer to her, so why would you say let her do yibum? It's Saras Ereva. It's hard to understand that. But Vasu b'shtei kiti edim nami sveka d'Rabbanan hi. It's also saving d'Rabbanan with two pairs. Why don't we just say the two cancel out and we keep the woman on her chazaka like we usually say? So it's possibly comparable to the possessions of the Marshatya, which is a Gemara in Baba Basra or Ksuvas. It says here about this person who was a shaita. The Marshatya Zavin Nichse. He was selling his possessions. Also Beitrei, and two people came. The Amri Keshu Cholim Zavin. Two people said it was a valid sale because he sold it when he was healthy in mind. Yosef Beitrei the Amri Keshu Shaita Zavin. Said no, he sold it when he was a shait, and therefore it was not a transaction. A shait can't do business like this. So the question is, what do we do? Who's the owner of this automobile? As we continue to Lamed Alpha and Beis, so you have two witnesses that say he was a shaita, two say he wasn't. So what do we do? So it's 2 against 2. Va'ara in the land, not a car. Ukma b'cheskes bar shatya. We say that it stays b'cheskes bar shatya because it should stay where it is. So l'chayra, we should say the same thing when it comes to all these other things too. That we cancel 2 and 2, and therefore we just keep her wherever she is. So if there's a suffix kedushin, so it's 2 against 2, but we say the chazaka is that she should be mutter to the shuk. By the case of the suffix gerushin, 2 against 2, we would say that the suffix the chazaka is that they're both co-wives, and therefore she should. In that case, she's mutter. The other way around. When it comes to suffix kedushin, because there's a chance that the Sarah did not have a co-wife, that's why maybe you would say she should do chalitza. But when it comes to the case of suffix gerushin, We would not say that because there's 2 against 2, which means they are b'chazaka married to this one man. That's Tsaras Erba. So why don't we just say 2 against 2? Why are we saying, it's by the difference between 2 pairs, 1 pair? They should just cancel out. Let a friend say for him. In other words, one is going to explain the other. Tana b'kedushin v'hu adin l'gerushin. Tana b'gerushin v'hu adin l'kedushin. So our Mishnah talks about kedushin, and the same din is by gerushin, and vice versa. Says Rashi, Tana b'kedushin savik karvlo v'hu adin b'gerushin. Tana b'gerushin kasav b'ksav yado v'hu adin l'kedushin. In other words, it's true that when it talks about cases of kedushin and talks about the cases of gerushin, there really are each one. You could use those cases for each one. So therefore, according to this, Taka, when it comes to the situation of gerushin, Safek gerushin, it could be talking about a case of karvlo. In that situation, we do require chalitza, and we're not concerned that you may end up doing yibum. That seems to exclude something. Everything that's in the kedushin category falls under the gerushin category. We said Safek karvlo. But yesh begerushin. But there are certain sveikos, like in our Mishnah, regarding gerushin, mashein b'kedushin. V'zehu de gerushin lav davka. When it says zehu by gerushin, it's lav davka. By kedushin, it's davka. In other words, there are certain exclusions in the cases regarding of the Safek gerushin that do not apply to a case of Safek kedushin. El mishum de tana zeh b'kedushin, tananami zehu b'gerushin. Zeh de kedushin limute mai. So what's it come to exclude out of those categories? Limute zman, deleka b'kedushin. That when it talks about get, a get must have the time on the get. However, when it comes to kedushin, one of the ways you can be mekadosh a woman is through a shtar, through a document. That document does not require zman, and therefore, if we said by Safek gerushin has to do with zman. So if there was no zman on the get, so that's where we say you must do chalitza. However, that rule doesn't apply when it comes to giving kedushe shtar. That doesn't require zman, and since it doesn't require zman, so the din is that it's a valid kedushin. There's not a suffix in that case. So lemute zman the lake of the kedushin. So malo tikkun zman kedushin. Stam. Why don't we write it on the document? If it's a document, why don't we write the time? So hanicham peri. I can understand if the whole issue is because of peri, because of fruits. Arusa leisla peri. A woman who only underwent eris in her kedushin is not shaykh to the paris anyway, says Rashi. Now it's brought down to Masechtas Gittin, in Perikola get. The other way around. Why is there a get? Why does the get have zman? Yishum peri. What does that mean? Leida mi'amosai tigva mibala peros. Because once she gets divorced, we want to know when they can recollect from the bala fruits. Sha'achal menichsi melug. If all the fruits that was eaten from the nechsi melug, which are hers, Savar mishashanasan einav ba lagarsha shuv ein lo bal perais. At the time that this man wanted to divorce her, he no longer has rights to her nechse malug. So therefore, we want to know if, let's say, he continues eating from her peros. So we have a document now to be able to verify the time that the divorce was given, and we can say, all right, this man was not supposed to be eating peros from this point on afterwards, and therefore it's a form of protection for her. However, when it comes to Erison, he's not entitled to the peros, says Rashi. The man is not entitled to her fruits from her nichse malug until they actually get married and do chuppah. So therefore, there's no need to have zman on kedushin because it doesn't have any. There's no need to protect her because he's not entitled to those fruits anyway. So that makes sense. The distinction, if it has to do with fruits, arusales leperi. Was sakin zman. What if the issue is because of your sister's daughter, basa chayso? What is that? Says Rashi, Shema yehi nosui basa choso, let's say you're married to your sister's daughter, v'sizne tachtav, and she's mizana, v'yira edim mimashmishin uvoyin, that you, even though there was tashmish, v'yachas aleha, v'yirgarshena, and you decide you don't want to make a big deal about it, so you're just going to divorce her. You're going to give her a get. You're mekodim znus shiatim eidim kvar nisgarsha. So he'll write her again and say, I gave it to her before she was mizana. So it's a way of protecting her. So he said, well, I'll divorce her. But if there's you have to write the time, so that's a way of again showing that wasn't true, that really she was mizana tachtov while he was married. So that's why we require a zman. So that's a second reason. So l'sakin zman. Well, we should say the same thing by kedushin, because what if she was mizana, and he would say, oh no, I gave that was before we had kedushin. But if you wrote the zman on the kedushin, you would also be able to avoid that issue. So that's for that reason you should have zman on a get, on a star of kedushin. Mishum deika the mekadosh b'kasma, the mekadosh b'shtara, lo tikun rabbanan zman, because that's not the only way of marrying her. You can also just simply do kedushin with giving her money, which obviously does not require zman. So since the act of kedushin works without writing the time, so therefore we don't require by a star either. Armuli Rav Acha b'Rei Rav Yosef Rav Ashi v'ha avda deika dekani b'kas v'ika b'shtara v'tikun rabbanan zman. So he says, I don't understand, but there are when it comes to purchasing a slave, you can be kind of kasev or you can be kind of with a star, and yet for some reason when it comes to a star of purchasing a slave, you do write the zman. So hasam ruba b'shtara, hacha ruba b'kasva. We go after the majority. When it comes to purchasing a slave, the majority of it is done with a document. However, when it comes to marrying a woman, the majority is with kesef, and therefore if you happen to be mekadosh with a star, which is an uncommon circumstance, or it's not as prevalent, so therefore because of that, you don't need zman. E-boy saying that's one answer. Mishum deloy esher. Maybe the reason why we don't write on a get on for kedush star zman because it's not possible. Heichalev, what should you do? Lincha gabidida machale. If you leave the star by her, she may erase it, right? If the whole issue is because of zman, and you give her the star, is what you do. You give her this star, she's going to erase the zman anyway. So lincha gabidide. So okay, so leave it by him. Zimnin de basa chaysohi umechapola. So again, it's possible that because he's marrying someone who is somewhat indirectly related to him, right? So he's marrying his sister's daughter, so he's not going to have her punished, or he's going to still protect her. So lincha gabi edim. So maybe witnesses should have to hold on to this star. Now, if they would remember, then they could just testify anyway, even without a document. There's no benefit in them holding the star. Now, if they don't remember, zimnin dechazu michtava, maybe they'll see the document written, yasam sahade, and they're going to testify not based on their memory, but based on the document. Rahman Omer mipiyam v'lo mipiksavam. So it's interesting, even if they have this document, they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to testify. But if they don't really remember, that's problematic. So therefore, we don't want them to have the get either, the kedusha shtar either. Therefore, we don't write zman. Ihachi b'gershinami, name a hachi, why don't you say the same thing by get? No, hasam, what sol didakasi, hachal chayiv didakasi. When it comes to a get, it's lahatsol didakasi. We're doing it as a form of protecting her. The leikol amecha, says Rashi, dilma machale. She's not going to erase it. The chi asu sahadi, whose witnesses come to zinsa, that she had znus, ilo maisi shtara di garsha becheskasei shasish. So she's going to end up being a chazaka that she's married if she doesn't produce that star, that get. So obviously she's not going to tamper with it, because if she tampers with it, that could become problematic. Avol hashda, when it comes to kedushin, the opposite way around, that it's l'chayv didaka asi. Avol hashda de tikkun rabbanan Gilo Maisila, Mukminin law, Achazaka, Vikatlinin law. Again, in that case, they'll think that she's married. However, when it comes to the other way, Zman de Kedushin, V'taken l'Rabbanan Zman, if they wrote the time on Kedushin, V'zinza, and she was Mazana, so Kav Shalei l'shtar, she'll just hide the star, O Mach Chalei, she'll race, V'kaima Cheskes Penuya, can be car, she'll say, what do you mean? I'm not married to this guy, I never got anything. So, I heard you were Kedushin, and you were Mazana afterwards, what are you talking about? So, I was not, and everyone knows her as a Penuya, so therefore, because of that, that's not going to be an issue. Okay, question 5. Tanan. Hoysa omedis b'rshus harabim, mechsa al mechsa, megreshus and megreshus. So my hilchasa, when it says that half and half, what does it mean that it's like a suffix when it comes to gerushin? So we saw the imhu kohen asurlo, that if this man was a kohen, he's usher to her, or the ervahi sarasa boy chalitza, that if this woman is an erva, then she's going to need chalitza, because again the concern of whether or not the other woman was divorced. Question 6. Madul lo tiknu zman b'kedushin kamo shetiknu b'gitin metam shaloi yechba al basa chaysai. So he said either. Actually, there's only one it's actually two answers. Either because the ruba b'kaspa Mikachin says the majority of people do Kedushin with Kasef, so that's not an issue. Therefore, the fact that it's with a star, we're not going to require Zman. Or the Gabi Man Lincha Hahi Macha Levachain Hu. Gabi Edim Hashinan Nekamsadi Mepiksavam. We don't know what to do with this document. We can't, if we give it to her or to him, it can be tampered with. And if it's given over to witnesses, either they'll remember it. If they remember, they could testify even without it. And if they don't remember, then that's an issue because it has to be bepihim. It has to be based on their own memory, not from this document. So therefore, because of that, we don't want, and we will not rate a zman on a shtar kedushin. Okay. Let's see. Question TB 16. So it's the exact same question as we said by number 6 is TB 16. And it's again either because of kesef or because of the possibility that she'll hide it, or she'll end up tampering with the document and can't give it over to the witnesses either, etc. Okay, let's see the next Mishnah. Gimel Achen. So you have 3 brothers. In this situation, finally, it's a little different. Nesuin Gimel Nacharios. So there's no sisters involved at all. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are married to 3 unrelated women. Umeis Achen Mehen. And Reuven dies. So now there's 2 brothers left, Shimon and Levi. V'yasabo Hashini Maimer. Now Shimon was already married, but he didn't do Yibum with Reuven's wife. He did Maimer, which is some close connection, but not total. And then Umes, and then Shimon dies. So now, again, Levi is the only brother. Levi's already married, but there's 2 women over here. One is Shimon's wife, which is a full-fledged Shemesha, is Yevamot. But Reuven's wife, on some level, there was this Maimer, this connection. So it's almost as though he has to do Yibum with Reuven's wife and Shimon's wife because she didn't totally become Shimon's wife yet. So Hari Elu Cholzos Lomas Yevamos. In this situation, we only allow Chalitza. Shnem Umes Achan Mehen. That one of the brothers dies. Yevama Yabo Leha. That's when you do Yibum, when one of the brothers dies. Sha'aleha. What is that? It's only Shaleh Zikas Yavam Echad, when there's only one Zika from one Yavam. However, V'lo Shaleha Zikas Beis Yavamin. Over here, she has a bond through 2 of the brothers. Since Maimer created a second Zika on a second man, so there's no Yibum. So there was this Zika. It's not like, again, if it would have been that she would have already been married to Shimon, that would have been one thing. But over here, we're talking about where only Maimer was done. So there was a Zika on Reuben and a Zika for Shimon. and therefore Levi cannot do Yibum for that woman that Mimer was done. Now Shimon Omer, this is specifically talking about that one woman. Says Rashi, Zikas Shnei Yavamin, the Cholzman Shul Kansa Zeh, as long as this guy didn't actually do Yibum, Adain Zika Rishon Aleha. So there's still a Zika to the first brother, to Reuven. V'nitoisefas Aleha Zikas Mamaro. So therefore now there's an extra Zika from Shimon when he did Mimer. Hari Kishimei Zeh. So now that when Shimon dies, Nosu Leha Zikas Shnehem. There's a double Zika on this girl. The Ilu Kansa, if he would have married her, then Havi Paka Zika de Kama. Then the original Zika would have been gone because the Zika is until the actual Yibum takes place. The Chimayas, and therefore, when Shimon would have died, Havi La Ela Zika Sheni. And therefore, he would have definitely been able to do to Yibum with her. Inami Lu Ovid Bo Mimer. Let's say he didn't do Mimer at all, right? Lo Havi La Ela Zika Rishon. Then it would only been a Zika to Reuven. So from Reuven. So the Mimer created this issue. And therefore only Chalitza can be done. Okay. Weiter in the Gemara, in the Mishnah rather. So we quoted the Pasuk. However, this is actually a machlokos. Shimon Omer miyabim le'ezeh shir tzevachayitz l'shniya. According to Rav Shimon, he holds that Mimer has this element of strength, and therefore it's not considered to be that. It's considered like it's just Shimon's wife, and therefore now he could do, as he says, he can do Yibum le'ezeh shir tzeh. He can do Yibum to one and then does Chalitza to the other, says Rashi. So what exactly does this mean? So he's going to explain the Ima Marishal Sheni Mimer. If let's say Shimon's Mimer really meant something, the Eshes Sheni Hu Boil, then it's like it's considered to be like his Shimon's wife. Im Enu Mimer Eshes Rishon Hu Boil. So he says like Mamanav Shach basically. If when he has Yibum with her, so Mamanav Shach, either it's Reuven's wife or it's Shimon's wife. If Mimer means something, so it was Shimon's wife. If Mimer meant nothing, then it's Reuven's wife. The Chotashnia. The Chadalo Miftara Babia. The Idach. Dilma Mimer Lo Kani. The problem is, what if it actually was not a Mimer? Right? So if it was not a Mimer, Vahadulu Beis Yevamos Habois Me Beis Batim. So you have two women coming from Reuven, one from Reuven, one from Shimon. Therefore, so therefore he does Yibum with one, the Shimon's wife, and then this woman who did Mimer, because it's possible, as we said, maybe it was not a Mimer, so she can't just go free because there's a Zika from Reuven. You can't do Yibum with both. Why not? Why don't you just do Yibum with both wives? Like, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Dilma Mimer Kanui. Because what if Mimer actually meant something? Because if it's two Yevamos that come from one house, this is something which perhaps was not alluded to yet in the Masechta, even though this is apparently obvious, that you have two Yevamos that come from one house, so you don't do Yibum on both of them. You only do Yibum on one, and then you do Chalitza on the other. Okay. So 1 second. Fact Gemara. According to the Rabbanon, that says that you better just do Chalitza, don't do Yibum in this situation, because there's a Zika still of Reuven, and there's a Zika of Shimon, and that's Beis Batim. So you can't do Yibum on that with that woman. So if Zikas Beis Yevamot Deraisa, if this is a din deraisa, chalitza na milo tiboy, then l'chayr we shouldn't require chalitza either. Why are we requiring chalitza? If the Torah itself says this is nothing, so then it's nothing. Element Rabbanon. You're right. Me'ikar din, you shouldn't need to do chalitza in this situation at all, because the pasuk says that Mimer is enough, that it's not enough to remove the original Zika. So therefore, why in fact do we require it? Because a person will maybe say like this: when it comes to two Yevamos that comes from one house, maybe you'll end up doing Yibum. You'll end up doing Yibum if they were both from the same house. So we say, okay, So let's go to Rashi. The Midaraisa Maimer Lo Kani. Vahavilu Shtei Yevamos Beis Batim. V'Tivayu Matzi Avume. If it was from two houses, then you do Yibum, one for Reuven, one for Shimon. Rabbanan Hu Degazer Shema Yomer Beis Yevamos Abayis Mabayis Echad Mis Yevamos. You would maybe think, well, it looks like it's two Yevamos, two actual Yevamos that are coming from Shimon's house, and not supposed to do Yibum there. And therefore that's the reason why. So V'niyavim L'chada V'nichlotz L'chada. So then do Yibum with one, do Chalitza with one. Why are we saying, so here it's saying you have to do Chalitza with both. Because there's Shema Yomer Bayis Echad Miksaso Banoi, as we continue along with Beis Aleph, Miksaso Chalutz. So a person may say, it doesn't look good. Regarding the one person who died, you're gonna build that person's house, and the other one you're just gonna do chalitza, right? So it says Rashi, may end up coming to say that that maybe that's what you're gonna end up doing. So Gemara answers, so a person would maybe make that same distinction. Say it's not right. V'yomru. So let them say. So idim yamim b'hadar cholitz hachinami el gzera dim cholitz bereisha v'hadar miyavim. The concern is, what if you do chalitza first and then you do yibum? So what? What if you do the chalitza first and then yibum? But kamalei b'asher lo yivna, that you've already put into the category of lo yivna, that you've established not to do Yibum, Rachman Amar Kivan Shlobana Shovlo Yivna. That once you stop building, then you can no longer do Yibum. So once you do Chalitza, you can't do Yibum afterwards to the other one. Even though technically you could do Yibum and then Chalitza, but the reason why we won't allow is because the other way around. So Amar Rava Nasan Get Lo Mamaro, if let's say he gave, going back to our Mishnah, that Shimon did Maimer. But what ended up happening was he gave a get to the one that he did mimer with. Hutur tsarasa. Avol asura de machalfa bebalas get. Bigadi army omer rava nasan get lumamaro hutra afilu he. My taima, my de ovid ba shakle. So let's see this again. So he says like this. Let's say you have Shimon, and he gave a get to this woman that he did mimer with. So if he didn't give a get, so we said, so according to the Rabban, you have to do chalitza. But once mimer, even though mimer was done, but the get causes an element of releasing, hutrat sarasa. At that situation, we now will allow, when Shimon dies, that Levi could actually marry the tzara. That will be allowed. Avol he, the one who did the mimer, Shimon, asura. At that moment is going to be aser. The mechalfa bebalas get. Again, Ika di Amri, some say Omer Rav, so look in Rashi, Avol hi asura. V'lo mishum de kamle b'lo yivna, de paisla al achiv, hanishar shahaylo nasan get lazika, el mishum de asla chufi bebalas haget. You can end up getting confused. Avol get l'mamaro lo dachi el mimer. The get for the mimer only pushes off, removes the mimer. V'nishara zika rishayna lim kaima. And basically what it does is it puts the original zika in its place. And therefore, once mimer was done, he's allowed to do, he's allowed to take the tzara because he's no longer connected to her. Omer Rava nasan get l'mamaro hutra afil he. Actually, that's not true. Even the third one says Rashi l'shlishi k'shamos sheni. When Shimon dies, Levi's allowed to take her. My time amada ovid bas shakle. Says Rashi, what he did was removed. V'havi k'moshlo asaba mimer. It's as though mimer was never done. V'yasa misyavemes l'shlishi machma zikas achiv rishayna. So it's interesting. He says, if Shimon did mimer and then gave a get, it's like she goes completely back to her original status. So when Shimon dies, so Shimon only had one wife. So Levi can do Yibum with that wife, and he can also do Yibum with the first wife because there's no longer any connection because the get removed entirely that. So therefore, he's allowed to take her. He's allowed to take both of them. That's according to this Ikad Amri. Again, the first is he could only take the tzara, but he would not be able to, the Shimon's wife, but Levi would not be able to take the one that he did Maimer with, because the Mechalfa Bebalas get. So in this situation, again, there's that element of confusion. All right, let's see if there's any more questions. I believe, yes, question 7. Maharaya, how do we see from our Mishnah the Zikas Beis Yevamim Lav Deraisa, that the Zika of taking 2 women who are Yevamim is not Midaraisa? It says this case, Midanan de boy Chalitza. The fact that it says we need to do Chalitza in our case, Vidaraisa he Chalitza nami lo tiboy. If it's actually Din Deraisa, you shouldn't have to do Chalitza either. Therefore, we said it's just a Gezerah, and it's a Din Deraban. Adkan.